Welcome to the Sound of Economics. My name is Guntram Wolff and I'm the director of Bruegel, and I bring to you today the director's cut, in which I discuss with Bruegel Senior Fellow Alicia García-Herrero in Hong Kong and Bruegel Senior Fellow André Sapir here in Brussels with me. We want to discuss the emerging global trade war that has kept our policy system very active in the last few weeks. As you know, Donald Trump has announced tariffs on steel and aluminium that have taken effect last week. And in last week, there was also a decision where the Trump administration has, at least temporarily, exempted the European Union from those tariffs. There's also been an agreement to exempt South Korea from the tariffs. So everybody looks at this now and wonders who gets exempted next and who's on which side. We've seen that China has announced to respond with strength and resolve against Donald Trump's measures. And so I guess my first question, Alicia, is to you. You sit in Hong Kong and you observe this very much from the Asian perspective. And so I would love to hear from you. How is this trade war perceived on the Asian side? Do we have a situation where people think they have to choose sides, or what is the story from an Asian perspective?
Very good question. Of course, the financial markets have reacted very negatively to all of this. In most of Asian countries, particularly those who are more open to trade, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China itself. So it's obviously not very good news for Asia. However, as you move to how the reaction of, say, Japan, let alone Korea, has been, you can realize that there's some countries, either because they've been exempted in the case of Korea, or because they expect to be exempted, or at least to be more sidelined towards the US, the reaction has been more positive. So that already explains the market reaction, how governments are seeing their take in this trade war, or at least embryonic trade war so far. And it's simply as follows. If the US continues to isolate China, you need to take your position, whether you're going to remain closer to China trade-wise and overall, I guess this can move beyond trade, or you're going to move apart and get exempted by the US, which is Korea's case. So Singapore, of course, big question mark. For Taiwan is very difficult. Of course, Taiwan cannot officially be exempted, as you can imagine. But the question is, even if it were to be, it would be a massive loss for Taiwan for all goods and purposes. So everybody's thinking, okay, what can I do about this? What's going to be my take if I'm even asked the question, yeah? China itself, though, has started to react with its own measures. So it's not only about the US accepting you, it's about China including you in their own measures. So China is starting with anti-dumping measures against Europe, Japan, and the US. So what about Singapore? What about Australia? What about Korea? So everybody's trying to figure out what is their first best. Whether they have the option to choose is a different story.
Well, the European Council met last week, André, and discussed exactly that question. And I think it's fair to say that the European Council was happy to be that Europe is temporarily exempted, but that it clearly signaled its regret for the decision of the United States to impose tariffs in the first place. The European Council also very much supports the European Commission in their measures to protect and reserve the rights of the EUs in compliance with WTO rules, so as to respond strongly to the US, but not too strongly, in a proportionate manner. And of course, the European Council couldn't help but evoke that, of course, we have a strong transatlantic relation that is at the core of security and prosperity for both the United States and the European Union. Now, this leaves us in a very awkward situation. I mean, it almost looks as if the European Council has already said, well, we've chosen sides and we are actually with the US, even though China and Asia is by now a more important trading partner for Europe than the United States. Is that true? So have we actually picked sides already, or is there still a way for Europe not to pick sides, André?
Well, I think we are leaning certainly towards one side, but we are feeling very uncomfortable because indeed both the US and China are our main trading partners. The US is our main export market, and China is our main supplier. So we have certainly a lot of interest with both of those two giants, and at the same time, we are not in the same kind of global competition of a economic military level as maybe the US and China are. So I think we are very mindful to keep a balance, a global balance, to protect our interests, but also to prevent really hard conflicts between China and the US that would have very detrimental effects for us. So, how do we deal with that? Now, first, I think I should say that it's interesting that President Trump started with the steel conflict, and the same day, last week, Thursday, that the US decided to exempt the EU for 3 months of the measures on steel, that's the day also that President Trump announced very big measures against a wide range of products on China. And in a sense, the message that was given to the Europeans is that, you are exempted from the steel measures. I'm taking tough measures against China on steel, but also on other products. And I want to know, between now and 3 months from now, the time that I'm giving you to decide whether those measures, this exemption is temporary or permanent, I want to know on which side you are. And the EU, I think, has to think whether it's looking at this as a game only about steel, which I don't think it is, or it's a much bigger game. And in that case, how do we avoid, indeed, to be caught between the two? My sense is that what we need to do, and this is not going to be easy, is that we need to bring both the US and China back at the table in Geneva, at the multilateral table. Because otherwise, in a sense, we are going to be squeezed out. If the real game is about China and the US, what is the role of the EU here? Is to look a little bit of our economic interest on the one side, economic interest on the other. But, we are not going to be a player. The only way we can be a player is by being at the head of a coalition of countries to say that the world trading system, the rules-based system, is what is the primary objective that we have, and that we have to convince the US and China, but to make proposals on how to indeed reform some of the rules. Because I think this is what the essence of the problem is here, is that the US and China are not happy with the way the rules-based system is being operated at the moment. And we see that. And that's why they are sort of avoiding going to Geneva. They're trying to, deal with this in a bilateral way and having us caught in the middle. So I think the only way that we can play this game is by bringing back the discussion at the multilateral table.
Right, but André, let me tease you a bit on that. I mean, so the U.S. president has clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with the WTO and the multilateral trading system, and China itself certainly feels increasingly strong and increasingly a player on its own. So I think your plan A looks nice, but what if it doesn't work? Where do we go from there? I mean, what if WTO is not going to be the place where this will find a peaceful resolution? I think one big issue, and we haven't talked about the pure economics here, is that, of course, as soon as the US imposes tariffs on Chinese imports, the Chinese will look for different markets to place their products, and so Europe is going to be swamped with steel and all kinds of other products, to which it will be very difficult from a European point of view to resist more protectionist pressure to avoid basically those goods to be dumped on the European market. So potentially, I mean, the risk it seems to me quite high that we will actually end up in a spiral, in escalating trade war, and where the European Union will have almost no choice but to impose tariffs on Chinese imports as well, if it wants to avoid a destruction of its own industry. So how can we avoid it if Plan A doesn't work?
I'm still a Plan A person, because not a Plan B, because I think Plan A is our only solution. There is no, if we look at it from a little longer term perspective, I don't think that the view of Europe in favor of the multilateral system is only a ideological, and it is sort of in our DNA. It is in the treaty, in the Rome Treaty. It is also in the declaration that heads of states made on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome last year. So it's not just that; it's also that it is in our interest, in the sense of the three big players, we are the weaker one. And therefore, for us, the rules are important, because we do not have the same strength, military strength, political strength, that the US and China have. So the rules protect us and protect also the weaker countries in the world. That's why I think for us the option is to be at the head of a coalition with all the other countries that view, like us, that the rules-based system is their best defense against the rule of the jungle. And in the rule of the jungle, then indeed, that's the G2. We need to avoid by all means to get a world which is a G2. No G7, no G20, G2. And G2 is US and China, and forget about everybody else. So I don't think that we can give up on Plan A. We need to be smart on trying to pull Plan A, and that means a coalition of countries.
Okay, Alicia, I want to bring in you to talk a bit about Plan B and how you think Europe should respond, and then I want to end with my own thoughts on this. But Alicia, please.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, of course, I agree that Plan A is the best for Europe, no doubt about it. But the question is, in order to really have Plan A, you need the US and China. You just can't have Plan A without them. By the way, no matter how important multilateralism may be for, say, Singapore, they won't push for that unless they see the US and China aligning towards that end. So it's, and frankly, people sometimes now, given the lack of response by the WTO, are wondering, is that the place to go for Plan A, frankly? So, should we think about a new institution? I mean, it's like that Plan A, in the way I perceive it now, seems quite a long plan to go. I mean, it's not going to be solved tomorrow. So my Plan B is within that Plan A, meaning, for the time being, what can we do? And I think that, we have probably to learn about Switzerland in the Cold War, something like that, meaning, can we play a brokerage role? Can we, rather than just jump in Trump's arms and, what did I hear? Did you give me temporary exceptions? Oh, I really thank you for that, my lord. I mean, I think that's not a strategy for Europe, frankly speaking. We need to show the US that we could actually shift. I mean, that could actually benefit, say, aircraft industry. Yeah, I just checked the data. 68% of imports, airplane imports from China, come from the US. It's not us, it's the US. 68. We have things to sell. We have things to China. What I'm trying to say, the US has a massive economic dialogue with China. Let's face it, we don't. We have France, the UK going for their own bilateral dialogues, getting peanuts, sorry to say. So, can we kind of step up and say, Well, we're also here. I think China needs Europe more than ever, because again, it's all about who will be as isolated. So there's a high price our price in the market has suddenly risen. And I think we need to realize that, so that we just not, simply run for whomever, which is basically the US, given our historic transatlantic alliance, that reduces our value, our price at the moment. And this is what I mean. Yeah, while playing the A strategy, for the time being, we need to increase our value for the two contenders. That's all I was thinking about. That maybe we lose on steel, Guntram, but we get something else instead of raising tariffs on steel. We could work with the Chinese on their excess capacity. Frankly speaking, again, a lot of that steel is going to end up in Belt and Road countries. They may not necessarily need to dump it on Europe. Maybe not. Maybe we can negotiate that with China. I think we need to start talking serious stuff with China. We cannot only just wait for Trump to wake up and exempt us. I think that's not something we can afford.
Well, Alicia, I sort of like your idea of showing leadership by showing to the US that we can also choose China as a partner. However, I wonder how far that strategy can go, because, of course, China is also, from our domestic point of view, certainly a controversial trading partner that is seen as a very tough competition for many of our industries. But also there's the whole security dimension on which we feel very dependent on the United States. And so I certainly see your point of view of playing a little bit both sides so as to stay neutral. But I also think that if I was sitting in the White House or in Beijing, I wouldn't really believe you when you do this. So I'm not sure that strategy would work either, but I think certainly going in that direction could help. Perhaps the one point I would want to add to conclude our podcast today is to say, well, really what... if we want Plan A to work and we want to go through the WTO and make sure that things settle at the WTO, I think the one thing we need to also show is we need to show leadership and need to show that to our partners that we are also ready to give something. And that brings me, I think, to our domestic economic policy agenda. I do think that the European Union is actually quite vulnerable to the global trading developments, also because of its very large current account surplus, export trading surplus. And so here we have a situation where we export massively more than we import. And that is, rightly or wrongly, seen as a huge issue in the United States. And of course, the focus here is on Germany with its 8% current account surplus. So I think if we could sort of sell to Donald Trump that we do something that is sensible anyway, namely a change in our domestic economic policy agenda, where we will create more demand, more investment, more domestic growth, that will be actually a huge win. It can be sold politically as a huge win in the United States, and could be the kind of argument that brings people back to the WTO. But it would require a massive rethinking of our macroeconomic domestic economic policy strategy, and I think that certainly should be part of the overall strategy. So just saying, well, we go to the WTO and want you all to be at the WTO nice again with each other, I think would not offer any explanation of what really is the issue and how can we improve the situation. And so I think Europe also needs to be ready to not only play with the two potential with China versus the US, which is a game that is difficult for us to play, but also say, well, we will also address some of your concerns by having a different, be they warranted or not. Some of these concerns are certainly wrong, and I certainly don't endorse Donald Trump's trade view of the world, but still, the guy is in the White House, and certainly wants his concerns somehow to be addressed. Okay, I think that is all for today. Today's Director's Cut. It was my pleasure to host Alicia and André today. And until next time, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.